Hi everybody, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and as you can see out here on the bench, I've got some of my prepared bedding all set to go, as well as a nice portion of varied foods. It includes some moldy bread, some bits of pumpkin, as well as some carrot peelings, a little bit of coffee too over there inside that coffee filter. This is my grit that I use. It's pulverized eggshell, and the bin that we're going to be checking in on today is by far the smallest of all my systems. It's the worms that reside in this green tub here. This system is now 70 days of age, and it holds my mixed population of worms. So that means there's blue worms, there's red wigglers, and there's European night crawlers in there. I tried to fit it all onto the label. After 70 days, the system's had 5 feedings. One of the feedings went in there even before the worms went in. And over that time, 4 subsequent feedings, 5 feedings in total. Today they're going to get feeding number 6. And I think we're also going to go pretty generous on the bedding in there, because even though we originally estimated the population of that bin to only be a few dozen, I think we're well beyond that now. So let's get a glove on, get the system up on the bench, and get these little guys fed. Now, during previous check-ins, we would occasionally come in here and you would see some white powder sprinkled out across the top surface. And that was diatomaceous earth, sort of a natural organic pesticide. It's not poison, it's really meant to actually harm and kill the target pests. And this time you might have noticed that we didn't really have any on here. This little itsy bitsy worm. This is kind of what we've been after here, is trying to promote breeding within this population. Oh boy, let's go. Get off my finger, buddy. Hopefully we didn't leave any on the plastic, but I'm just going to fold it in half so that they've got a little bit of shade, as well as a way of preserving whatever moisture's on there until we're finished here. Shouldn't take us too long. Looks like we had a little bit of a top covering piece of paper here, which has been nibbled away, which is a good sign. It's always a good sign when the worms are consuming the stuff that you put in the bin, because everything you put in the bin is meant to be consumed, whether it's bedding or food, whatever the case may be. Ultimately, everything turns into food. Here too, we had a piece of paper. It was a coffee filter, just attempting to show us where we last fed. Not that it would be so difficult to figure that out. It's just a little bit of a tradition in my systems to use a coffee filter to indicate where we last fed. And the last feeding went right down the middle, as the feeding zone indicator suggested. It was a pretty small portion. It was a little handful of some beans. They're, I guess, wax beans maybe. They look like green beans, but they're not green, so I think they have their own special name. And I believe in addition to the green beans, which I doubt we're going to see any leftovers of, we had attempted to follow suit with what we're going to try to do today too, which is to add a bunch of bedding. So right below where the beans were placed, we're going to find a pretty good amount of it too, some leftover bedding from the previous check-in. I'm not going to allow that to change my mind. I'm still completely into giving them even more, because the more space that the worms sense that they have to be in, the more they're going to feel that they've got an opportunity to expand their numbers and grow their population. So even though we're seeing a good bit of leftover bedding down here within the feeding zone, I do plan on adding more. So this sort of reclaimed top covering paper will turn into supplementary bedding. We'll replace the top covering. You might have noticed that I had a piece of newspaper that I could use as a replacement top covering in here. And what the heck is that? And I've also got my bedding supply, so we can add to what's in here already. I guess I set it aside in the hopes that I might figure out what it is, or something would occur to me in terms of what we might have placed in here. But you know, Sometimes it's a little bit of a mystery. You might have noticed I took that little chunk of wood that I found out. I'm going to take that out too, because that's really seems to be just a chunk of wood as well. I wonder if it could have something to do with... No, I don't think so. I don't know. It's the mystery. A lot of times when I just add leaves, those leaves sometimes have things mixed in that my leaf vac, because I've got one of those leaf blowers that also doubles as a vacuum and bagger, so sometimes I just take the leaves as is and dump them into my bins, and certain unusual objects occasionally come along for the ride too. So I think we'll go ahead and we'll add in today's feeding right down the middle like we've been doing. And once we've had a chance to cover everything up, we'll take a quick glance at how things on the outer edges are coming along too. So these are the sort of large stems that sometimes come in with the bigger leaves. And they'll eventually break down too, but they're tough, you know, tough material. It's going to take the worms a little while to break it down. So why don't we get to reconstructing the feeding zone here. This is the paper I had intended to be top covering. So let's bring in just our fresh batch of ready-made prepared bedding here. So we're going to go ahead and plop in a handful. It does seem like a pretty good amount. I just want to have enough stuff to cover up the feeding zone with at the end, and I hope we have enough stuff. I think that should suffice. Because don't forget, we also need to leave space for all this food to get piled in too. This stuff came out of my freezer, so I'm going to see about trying to break it apart a little bit. It's had a moment or two to thaw. When I first took it out, I did have to use a knife to dislodge this large chunk of carrot peels from the main stash. And here too, you can see pumpkin bits that are now more easily popping apart from each other than they did earlier when they were still frozen together. This stash of pumpkins actually dates back to last year, and we're now just a few days away from Halloween. Once Halloween comes and goes, that means I could take the pumpkin that's out on my back porch as decoration and hack it up into little bits and stash it away as worm food going forward. So I need to make room and get rid of all of last year's supply of pumpkin bits. And I'm doing a pretty good job of it. I've gotten the majority of it fed to the worms. But I know that I've still got a little bit more to go. Now before we drop in this coffee, I'm going to sprinkle in a little bit of this grit I showed you earlier, the pulverized eggshell. And then I think we could start dropping in this portion of coffee too. Yeah, not bad. And then we'll use this in conjunction with this top covering paper as top layers. There was another coffee filter in there too. I'm going to set that aside. I don't think we need that much going in here. I do want to have enough, you know, material to cover up with here without the system kind of getting into overflow mode. And my hope was that some of this older bedding from the last time we came in here to feed 14 days ago is going to be adequate to cover up with. It seems like it is. Very cool, very cool. So I guess before we disrupt the material that was out here on these outer edges, even though I didn't see many signs, I think I saw one little flying insect in here. Something I've been trying to do in this system is combat what appeared to be a little colony of flying insects, maybe gnats or fruit flies that had moved in here. And I've got my spray bottle equipped with some of that mosquito dunks solution, which luckily is not only effective on mosquitoes, but also effective on other pests. And it just so happens that fruit flies are one of the types of creatures that it helps knock out. And I don't think you have to go too crazy. It's just a certain type of bacteria that interferes with the development of their larvae. So it's not going to kill any remaining fruit flies outright. It's just going to prevent that next generation that might emerge from any eggs they would have left in here. Prevent those larvae from developing into mature adult fruit flies. And I did actually spot one right before I started rolling the camera. It kind of hopped up here on the rim and then it flew away. But it does seem like we're pretty close to the finish line in terms of eliminating the pest situation here in this system, and I don't want to get complacent with not staying up on the BTI mosquito dunks regimen. I think it is a good thing to occasionally just refresh within every system, or maybe even just make it a matter of course to just always add a little bit every go around, so that that bacteria remains active within the system as a countermeasure to prevent any possible fruit fly larvae from growing and maturing and propagating the next generation. I'll tell you, considering we launched this system with what was estimated to only be about 36 worms, and that number was, you know, calculated based on an average of all the viewers' estimates. I think there might have been 8 or 10 people that kicked in their estimate of how many worms they think occupy this system. This looks like a peach pit. And you know, I think I'm going to pull this out too, just like I pulled out that couple pieces of wood that we encountered early on. That too is just something that I normally don't expect to see go anywhere in my worm bins. And I actually do have an unusual little collection of that sort of stuff, often a little 1.5 gallon bucket, which I've been considering doing some sort of an interesting test with or experiment with, but it just sits there dry. I'm just going to add that to that collection. And I think all we're going to do now is examine this other opposite end of the system to see how things look. Here again, look at all the worms hanging out in here. Like I said, we've got blue worms. They're the really skinny, dark colored ones that are fast movers. And then there's the European night crawler. So if you see a pretty good size worm in here relative to all the other worms hanging out in the system, chances are that it's a Euro. And then what comes in the middle is the red wigglers. So I'm assuming that all three are still represented in this system. Even though we started out with only an estimated 36 worms, I'm still of the thinking that all three types were still to some degree surviving in the remaining few worms that I was able to rescue and launch off into the system. So things are looking really nice in here. Lots of castings piling up. It appears like we've really recovered quite nicely, because I think that this is already beyond recovery stage. I think this is really just kind of a normal bin anymore. Might be time to start thinking about getting them into a slightly larger bin, but for now I think they're going to be okay in here. So why don't we begin restoring the coverings here? We've added the food, we've added the grit, we've added the BTI mosquito dunk solution, so I think we can begin restoring the coverings. Here again, feeding zone indicator almost covers the entire system. And I think we would do fine even without it, finding our way back to where we last fed. But like I said, it's a tradition in my systems to have that, so when I remember and I notice there isn't one, I like to add one for the fun of it, really. And back goes the plastic covering, which is doing a really good job keeping the moisture in the system contained and not allowing it to evaporate away and dry out. And I think that also helps a lot, keeping the stuff in here comfortable and cozy for the worms to be in. But that brings us to the end of the video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always very much appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.